You own assets, or do your assets own you? A question that seems simple, yet leaves many people silent for a long time. Because there are things you think you own: your house, your car, your phone, your luxury items. But if you stopped working, would they still be yours every month? Millions around the world live in a paradox they work day and night to pay for. Things that make them look rich, but feel poorer inside. I once told a friend, every time you sign for another debt, you sign away a piece of your future for someone else to hold. Debt isn't bad, but ignorance about debt is what makes people lose their freedom. Because if you don't control money, money will control you. I've seen many people fall into this trap. They think they're moving forward, but in truth, they're only tightening the invisible rope around their necks. In today's video, I want to share with you 7 principles that help you choose ownership over debt, so you don't just work for money, but let money start working for you. And you should stay until the end, because principle number 7 will make you rethink how you spend and redefine what we call financial freedom. Principle 1 good, debt vs bad debt. Know the difference to be free. Debt is the double-edged sword of the modern world. It can help you go further, but it can also take everything away. I once told my students, debt is like a knife. In a chef's hand, it creates a beautiful meal. In an unmindful hand, it causes injury. Likewise, debt isn't the enemy. The problem is what you use it for. I once met a man in Oklahoma. He borrowed from the bank to buy a new tractor because he believed it would help him harvest faster, reduce labor costs, and expand his farm. 3 years later, he paid off the debt, and that tractor was still generating income every season. In the same area, there was another man. He borrowed a similar amount, but not to invest. He used it to throw a lavish wedding. He said, "I want my wedding to be unforgettable." And it truly was, because afterward, he spent years paying off debt for a few hours of happiness. One man used debt as leverage, the other used debt as chains. The tool is never the problem. The mindset of the user is. Financially intelligent people understand good debt is debt that creates value. It makes money generate more money. Bad debt is debt that destroys value. It makes money leave and never return. If you borrow to open a business, to learn new skills, to invest in income-generating assets, that's good debt. But if you borrow to consume, to feel alive, to prove something to others, that's bad debt. Good debt brings you closer to freedom. Bad debt pulls you farther from it. I remember once after a seminar in San Diego, a young man came up to me and asked, "Jim, I want to buy a new car because I think I deserve it, but I'll have to take a loan." What do you think I looked at him and said? "You're not buying a car, you're buying a feeling. That feeling will fade once the car becomes an obligation." I didn't tell him not to buy the car. I just said, buy it with money you have, or with money that car will help you earn if it's truly a tool, because debt isn't wrong when it serves a purpose. Debt becomes dangerous when it serves emotion. Look at your own life. How many things have you bought, not because you needed them, but because you wanted them? How many times have you told yourself, "I deserve this," when in truth you were trading your future freedom for a few moments of pleasure? The poor use debt to comfort themselves. The rich use debt to accelerate their future. That's the difference. Imagine this. A man stands on a slope holding a rope. If he ties it correctly, he can pull himself up. But if he ties it wrong, that rope will pull him down. Debt is the same. It's the rope connecting your present and your future. The only question is, where are you tying it? Good debt doesn't keep you up at night. Good debt motivates you because it leads to a clear goal. Bad debt makes you sleepless because it brings nothing but pressure and anxiety. One sign of financial freedom is that you control debt, not the other way around. And that begins with awareness in every small decision. Am I borrowing for value or for emotion? When you learn to tell the difference, you're already halfway to freedom. Because those who use debt to create assets soon become masters of their own lives. And those who use debt to buy impressions remain servants to those very impressions. And if you think small consumer debts don't matter, wait until you realize they're burning away your future day by day. Let's move on to the next principle, consumer debt, the sweet trap of modern society. Principle 2.1, consumer debt, the sweet trap of modern society. I once said in a seminar, not all traps are made of ropes. Some are wrapped in pretty packaging and promises of 0% interest. And sadly, many people walk right into them, happily even smiling as they sign their debt contracts. We live in a world where consumption is celebrated as a symbol of success. Every day, you see hundreds of ads saying, "You deserve this car. You deserve the newest phone. You deserve a better life." And of course, the next line they say is, "Just pay in installments. It's easy." But behind those two words It's easy or years of work you'll spend paying for a few minutes of validation. I once met a young couple in California. They both had stable jobs and good income. When they got married, they bought a condo, borrowing 90% of its value. Then came the new car, the fancy furniture, and a trip to Hawaii. They told me, Jim, we just want to live a little because we deserve it. 3 years later, they no longer talked about deserving. They talked about pressure, about bills, about the suffocating feeling at the end of every month. I looked at them and said, you bought the feeling of an upgraded life, but you paid with the peace of your future. You see, consumer debt is the sweetest trap society ever made, because it makes you think you're moving forward when in reality you're quietly sliding backward. I'm not saying you shouldn't reward yourself. I'm saying don't use debt to buy emotion. Because emotions are short-lived, but debt lasts long. Ask yourself, do you really need that new phone? Or do you just not want to feel left behind? Do you really need that new car? Or are you just afraid of being judged? Because if the reason you buy is to prove something you're using the money of, your future, to patch the insecurity of your present. Many people tell me, Jim, but installments are convenient. I can split the payments, no pressure. I laugh and say, right, it's no pressure, until it all adds up. A $50 a month debt sounds small, but when you have 10 of them, you no longer own your money. You're working for your monthly payments. I call that modern slavery in a fancy suit. On the outside, you look fine. On the inside, you're chained by the bills you created. When you carry too many consumer debts, you lose something more valuable than money choice. You can't quit your job because of debt. You can't start a business because you fear the risk. You can't travel because your payment schedule won't allow it. You no longer live by what you want, but by what you have to. The rich understand this well. They don't buy to impress. They buy knowing that what they buy creates or preserves value. They don't buy from emotion. They buy with purpose. They don't buy a house to show they have one. They buy it because it's part of a financial freedom strategy. And that's why they grow freer, while most people grow more exhausted in the loop of work, pay, borrow, work again. If you want to escape this trap, the first step isn't earning more, it's spending more consciously. Every time you're about to buy something, ask yourself, will this serve me or will I serve it? If the answer is the latter, you're probably buying a rope disguised as a gift. I once said, you pay for things you don't need to impress people who don't even care. And that is one of the quietest tragedies of our time. Don't let yourself become a victim of the own it now invitations. Because if you truly want to own something, wait until you can pay for it with freedom, not with debt. And if you've ever thought, borrowing isn't bad as long as I can repay, the next principle will change your mind. Because the rich don't borrow to spend, they only borrow when that debt makes money create more money. Let's move on to principle number 3. Principle, send the borrow to invest, not to show off. I once told a young entrepreneur in Phoenix, not every loan is bad, but most people don't borrow because they need money. They borrow because they need to be seen. That's the difference between someone who uses debt to invest and someone who uses debt to show off. I told him 2 stories. The first is John, an old friend of mine in Dallas. He borrowed $50,000 to buy a small shop. He worked hard, studied management and marketing, and within 2 years, he turned that shop into a business with steady cash flow. Every month, the shop helped him pay the debt, and after the debt was paid off, it kept making a profit even when he wasn't there. John borrowed to build the foundation of freedom. The second is Mark. He borrowed almost the same amount, but to buy a sports car. When I asked why, he smiled and said, Jim, because I work hard, I deserve it. 2 years later, John had assets while Mark still had bills. One used borrowed money to buy a tool, the other used borrowed money to buy a feeling. The rich understand this very clearly. Borrowed money only makes sense when it creates new money. If a loan can't create cash flow, it isn't leverage. It's a burden wrapped in pretty words. I once asked an audience at a seminar, have you ever heard anyone say they invested in a new car? The whole room laughed. Because everyone knows a car depreciates the moment it leaves the showroom. And yet millions of people still call it an image investment. You cannot invest in impressions. Impressions don't create value. They only consume your energy, time, and freedom. If you must borrow for reasons that are worth it, borrow to learn new skills. Borrow to start a project with potential. Borrow to buy cash-flowing assets. But don't borrow to save face, because you can't send an invoice for face to the bank. But interest still arrives on time, no matter how many likes or admiring looks you get. A friend of mine named Robert once told me something. I'll never forget, Jim, if I use debt to buy things that make others applaud, then when they stop applauding, I'll still be in debt. That line is truly profound, because you can't repay debt with other people's approval. You can only repay it with the real value you create. See debt as a tool, like a hammer in a craftsman's hand. Used correctly, you can build a whole house. Used incorrectly, you can hurt yourself. And remember, a good craftsman never lets the hammer control his hands. Likewise, a financially intelligent person never lets a loan control their decisions. I want you to stop and ask yourself, does each debt I have help me create any value? If the answer is no, then perhaps it's time to put some things down. Not to look poorer, but to be truly rich. Rich in peace of mind, freedom, and clarity. One day you'll realize people won't remember what car you drove, but they'll remember who you were when they needed advice, trust, or an example of discipline. That is real wealth, the kind you can't borrow and can't buy. So, next time you want to borrow money, ask yourself, does this loan help me build a future, or just make me look like I already have one? If you can answer that, honestly, you'll avoid years of burden and regret. And when you understand how to borrow smart, you'll see a bigger truth. Financial masters don't just borrow right, they own right. Because ownership is freedom. Let's move on to the next principle. Principle 4, ownership, you freedom. I once sat talking with an older man in Texas. He had worked for 35 years at the same company, lived in a beautiful house, drove a luxury car, and had the appearance of a successful man. But as the conversation went deeper, he looked at me and said, Jim, there's something that troubles me. I own everything, but it seems nothing is truly mine. I asked, what do you mean? He smiled sadly. This house still belongs to the bank. This car is still on installments, and if I stop working for 3 months, I could lose both. I went silent. Because in that sentence, I heard the sound of dependence. In truth, many people live the same way. They look rich, but they don't truly own anything. You can have many assets on paper, but if each of those assets is tied to a repayment obligation, then the assets own you, not the other way around. I once said, when you own, you lead. When you owe, you serve. And this is the thin line between freedom and dependence. Freedom doesn't begin when you have more, but when you are no longer bound by what you have. I remember my early years when I first started building my career. I used to think success meant a big house, a new car, a nice watch. I worked hard, spent emotionally, and then one day I realized I was working for the very things I thought were symbols of freedom. I had traded time, energy, and the peace of my mind to pay for things that didn't truly belong to me. The day I paid off the first debt of my life, I felt true freedom, not when I had more money, but when I no longer owed anyone. Freedom isn't in a number, it's in a state of mind. When you work for passion, not for debt. When you spend based on value, not emotion. When you know that if you stopped tomorrow, life would still go on because you own your foundation. The truly rich don't try to own everything. They own enough to live free. They understand that ownership isn't just holding something in your hand, it's control the right to choose to decide to stop. They invest in real assets, equity in businesses, cash flowing real estate, intellectual property. Those things generate income while they can still spend time on what matters, family, health, and spirit. I once told an audience, when you own things that generate income even while you sleep, that's when you begin to be truly free. And to get there, you must make a very hard decision. Stop buying things that prove you're successful and start buying things that sustain your success. I recall a small story about a friend named Frank. He once borrowed to buy a big house because he wanted to live up to his position. 5 years later, he sold the house, paid off the debt, and bought a smaller, simpler home with no loans. I asked if he regretted it. He laughed, Jim, now I sleep deeper, eat better, and smile more genuinely. He lost part of his image, but he regained all of his freedom. When you truly own, you don't just have possessions. You have a peaceful mindset. You don't fear volatility, don't fear losing your job, don't fear what others think, because you know you run your life, not a debtor inside your own house. Remember, this freedom isn't defined by how many assets you have, but by your ability to say no and still be at peace. The more you truly own things of real value, the less you need things to prove your worth. But there's another kind of debt, not on paper, but in the mind. It's when we shop just to be recognized. And it is that, not the bank, that binds more people than anything else. Let's move on to the next principle. Escape the impression trap, buy freedom instead of buying image. Principle 5 drop, the impression trap. Buy freedom instead of buying image. I once met a man in Los Angeles. He wore a luxury suit, a watch worth over $10,000, and walked with the air of a successful person. When he sat down, he told me, Jim, sometimes I feel like I'm living in a movie where every day I have to act with props funded by the bank. That sentence made me pause, because he wasn't joking. He was truly exhausted from maintaining the image he'd built to gain other people's approval. We're living in an era where appearance matters more than essence. People buy what they don't need with money they don't, have to impress people who don't even care. And then they call it motivation to live better. But the truth is, you cannot build freedom on a foundation of showing off, because freedom and image run in opposite directions. I once asked a student, "Why did you buy that car?" He said, "Because everyone at the company drives luxury cars. I don't want to be looked down on." I replied, "Then that car isn't a vehicle, it's a shield to hide the fear of being judged. And when you spend to hide fear, you're buying temporary calm, not freedom." I was like that when I was young. When I started making money, I also wanted everyone to know I'd made it. I bought expensive things, shiny watches, and thought I'm proving something. But then one day I realized those who are truly successful don't need to prove anything at all. They don't try to look busy. They don't need to flaunt wealth. They simply live freely, do valuable work, and let results speak. A friend of mine named Carl once shared, "Jim, I sold my most expensive watch not because I needed the money, but because I realized it didn't tell time any better. It only reminded me that I once wanted people's attention." He invested that money into a small company, and a few years later it became a stable source of income. He said, "Now I don't need anyone to look at me to see that I'm successful because I feel it every day." When you buy to impress, you hand over control of your finances to others, because when their perception changes, you'll have to buy something else to maintain the image. That's a loop with no end. But when you buy to serve real value, you reclaim your sovereignty. I often tell audiences true wealth doesn't need to be seen. True wealth is when you can live the way you want without asking anyone's permission. If you can choose to rest without fearing the bills, choose to say no without fearing judgment, choose simplicity without feeling inferior, that is the pinnacle of ownership. Society always encourages you to perform, because every time you perform, you'll buy something new. And so you become a loyal customer of your own insecurity. But you don't need to prove anything to this world. You only need to prove to yourself that you're calm enough to choose freedom over other people's gaze. Consider this. When you look at others, you see image. When you look at yourself, you see truth. And only truth lets you sleep well at night. I once said in a lecture in San Francisco, "You can buy admiring looks with money, but you can only buy peace with discipline." When you choose to buy freedom, you don't just change how you spend, you change how you live. And when you understand that freedom isn't in the image, you begin to see a deeper level. Ownership isn't just assets, it's a mindset. That mindset is the foundation that truly sets the rich apart. Let's move on to principle number 6. Principle liu dai, ownership isn't just assets, it's a mindset. I once said in a seminar, the rich differ not only in how much money they have, but in how they think about money. And the deeper I go into life, the truer that sounds. Ownership for most people means holding something tangible. A house, a car, a company, a bank account. But for those who are truly financially free, ownership doesn't start with assets. It starts with mindset. I once met a man in New York who on paper had nothing remarkable. A small apartment, an ordinary job, but he had a particular habit every month. He invested 10% of his income into index funds, even if it was only a few $100s. When I asked why, he said, "Jim, I don't invest because I'm rich. I invest to learn to think like the rich." And that is the biggest difference. You may not have much money for now, but if you start thinking like an owner, you've planted the first seed of your own freedom. People with an ownership mindset don't ask, "How much do I earn?" They ask, "How much do I keep?" And do the things I own create value when I'm not there? They don't measure wealth by what they spend, but by what remains when they stop. I've worked with many young entrepreneurs who came to me with eyes bright with ambition. They said, "Jim, I want big success. I want to own many things." I asked them, "Do you want to own assets or own yourself?" And most fell silent. Because the truth is, if you don't own your emotions, habits, and thinking every asset you have is only temporary, I've met many people with millions of dollars, yet they can't stop comparing, can't sleep well, because they haven't truly owned themselves. They live by fear of loss instead of gratitude for what they have. True owners don't chase every opportunity, they choose carefully because they know not everything is worth having. They don't need to prove, don't need to satisfy others' gaze, because they know their value doesn't come from the outside, but from inner control. I recall a small story. In a talk in Chicago, a student asked me, "How can I become a true owner when I don't have money yet?" I said, "Start by owning your thoughts, own your time, own your decisions. Then money will just be the reward." Because if you can't master yourself even when you have money, it will soon leave you to find someone more deserving. The ownership mindset is how you view the world. When others see costs, you see opportunities. When others spend, you invest. When others complain, you learn. When others blame, you take responsibility. That is the ownership mindset. The one thing no one can take away, and the reason successful people still stand firm, even if they lose all their assets. I once lost nearly everything in my 30s. One wrong decision forced me to start over from zero. But I wasn't afraid. Because I knew I still had myself, still had habits, knowledge, and a maker's mindset. And indeed, just a few years later, I rebuilt everything. True ownership doesn't lie in what you have, but in your ability to recreate at any time. Remember this, my friend A. Person is only truly rich when they can lose all material things and still keep their character intact. Assets can disappear. But mindset, if you train it well, will stay forever. And when you built an ownership mindset, the final question is, how will you define freedom? Because sometimes freedom doesn't come from having more, but from needing less. Let's move on to the final principle where we redefine enough. Principle 7 non toward financial freedom, redefining enough. I once asked a businessman friend, how much do you need to feel enough? He looked at me, thought for a few seconds, then smiled and said, maybe just a little more. I've heard that answer hundreds of times from hundreds of people. And strangely, just a little more is a distance no one ever reaches. We live in an age where everything pushes you to believe you're not enough, not rich enough, not smart enough, not fast enough, not good enough to be happy. But you know what? Financial freedom doesn't begin when you have more money. It begins when you redefine enough. I once met a man in Oregon. He wasn't a millionaire. He lived in a small house by the forest with a garden, a few chickens, and a tidy expense journal. When I asked how he felt, he said, I don't have much, Jim, but I don't owe anyone. I have time to read, to teach my kids, to watch the sunrise every morning. And I realized freedom isn't about having more, it's about needing less. I never forgot that sentence because it holds one of the greatest truths about wealth. Many people think financial freedom is when they no longer have to work. But no, financial freedom is when you're not forced to do what you don't want to do. It's when you can say no to what doesn't align with you and yes to what truly matters. I once said in a lecture, the goal isn't to have everything. The goal is to have enough to live true to your values. If you can pay your rent, take care of your family, and still keep peace of mind, you're already richer than many who struggle to maintain the illusion of wealth. Financial freedom is a state of choice. You no longer chase money, you use money to chase meaning. You no longer fear losing because you know how to create again. You no longer compare because you know you're walking your own path. Smart people don't seek to live more luxuriously. They seek to live more independently. Because they understand a small home without debt is warmer than a mansion under a mortgage. They know a quiet morning with a book is worth more than an endless race to upgrade life. And they understand that true freedom isn't in a bank account, but in the calm of the soul. I remember once after a talk, a woman came up to me and said, Jim, I'm not rich, but thank you, because today I realized I already have enough. I just never stopped to see it. I smiled and said, then from today on, you're free. You see, freedom doesn't come from magic. It comes from awareness. When you know what enough means, you stop chasing others and start living your own life. I once told an audience, if you don't define enough for yourself, the world will define it for you, and it will never be enough. Pause, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, if I can live peacefully, debt-free, with time for the people I love, isn't that enough? If you can answer yes enough, you've just touched the peak of financial freedom. And when you understand these 7 principles, from distinguishing good debt, avoiding bad debt, borrowing, to invest, to redefining enough, you'll realize keeping money isn't hard. The hard part is keeping yourself awake in a world full of temptations. Let's move to the conclusion where we close this journey with a reminder from the heart. We've walked through 7 principles, 7 doors leading to both financial and inner freedom. You've learned to tell good debt from bad, to avoid the sweet trap of consumption, to understand that borrowing isn't bad if it helps you invest, not show off, to realize that ownership is freedom, to buy freedom instead of image, to build an ownership mindset, not just collect assets, and finally to see that true freedom isn't in having more, but in needing less. I want you to remember one thing: money doesn't buy freedom. Only mastery over money brings freedom. Because if you don't control money, money will control you. If you don't set limits on desire, the world will send you a bill every month. Freedom doesn't come from earning more, but from knowing how to keep use and stop. If these lessons resonate with you, hit like and subscribe so we can continue this journey together where we learn to master ourselves before mastering money. Because only when you master yourself, everything else begins to serve you. Remember this, if you don't design your own life plan, you'll fall into someone else's. And do you know what they've planned for you? Not much. Start designing your life by choosing ownership over debt. See you in the next video where we continue planting the seeds of discipline, wisdom, and freedom.